Okay, so EVO Japan is over now, and I think there is a lot of different things that you can talk about with this tournament. Obviously, just to like kind of give some time to talk about the actual literal tournament itself, it seemed like it was awful. It seemed like it was maybe one of the worst tournaments in terms of how it was ran, in terms of scheduling, the seeding, and everything. They basically didn't seed the tournament. There were a lot of cases of people getting double jeopardy in the tournament, aka losing to the same person twice, or at least having to play the same person twice in a bracket, which really shouldn't be happening. That hasn't been a thing in North American tournaments for a while now. Overall, the tournament itself obviously was good. Like the matches and everything were very fun to watch, but I've seen a lot of people talking about how, like, oh, you know, North American players went to, you know, Japan and they got cooked up, right? Like, we didn't do well over there. Or even players like Leffen and Latif, like, nobody made top 8 from outside of Japan, right? I'm not, like, making, you know, excuses for anybody or anything, but the tournament was just legitimately ran terribly. Apparently, it was super duper hot in the venue. It was very hard to breathe. There was no ventilation anywhere. The scheduling for everything was terrible. It honestly just seemed like one of the worst events you could have possibly gone to. Now, in regards to the tournament itself, it was obviously super duper fun to watch. Gobo ended up winning the tournament, of course, getting first place, and had a very incredible run coming all the way from, you know, loser side of top 8, had to beat TY, had to beat 2Rara, had to beat Daru, had to beat Umamin, and also had to beat Lox. Incredible losers run, honestly. I think there's a lot of interesting like storylines and just like information from this tournament as well. For example, we have Poka, who got winner side top 8. They're a 14-year-old happy house player, which is maybe the most terrifying thing you could ever see in the same, I think. In general, I think we got to see just how strong Japan really is in the same, because we really have not gotten that many great examples of like tournaments from them or anything. Obviously, not many of their players have been able to come to America or other tournaments in general. And we got to see just how good, not just the you know, the big names that we do know, right? Like TY and Bochi and Gobo, like we know those players, right? There's more players that are over in Japan that are also fantastic, and I think this tournament was cool to get to see all of them. I think the character variety over in Japan was pretty much what we expected. There was a lot of Soul players, I noticed. There was a lot of Giovanna players, a lot of Chip players, which is what we kind of knew from them as well. But I think something that was interesting is just how many Happy House players ended up making top 24 of this tournament. So here is actually a like character spread from the tournament. And as you can see, there was 5 Happy House players in top 24. The most represented character, even more represented than Soul and Giovanna and Chip and all of that. You know, a lot of people thought that like Japan didn't think that highly of Happy House, or they didn't have that many Happy House players over there. And I think as of more recently, that hasn't been true. And I think this really confirms it, that that character is obviously very, very strong. And they have a lot of players that play Happy Chaos over there. And watching them all play, they all play pretty similar to how some of the Happy Chaos over here play now, I think. So I think it's kind of interesting to see like the character variety difference compared to like North America. For example, in North America, we would have way more Ram players in top 24 probably. We'd have more Nagos, maybe even stuff like more Bikins or Jackos or something. But over there, they definitely believe in more of the simple characters, Soul, Giovanna, Chip. And just getting to watch Japan play has been really eye-opening for getting new ideas about the game, which has been really fun. And, you know, to go back into the idea of, you know, is Japan better than North America or whatever? Again, I don't think one tournament really decides that type of thing, you know? I think if you watch the matches, right? Like, for example, Jonathan Tene ended up getting 9th place, ended up losing to 2Rara, if I'm not mistaken. Jonathan Tene ended up losing to 2Rara in winner side of top 8, and then also lost to Daru in loser side to get top 8. Both of those sets were 3-2, and they were all incredibly close. So if you actually watch the matches between any of the, you know, North American players or whatever versus the Japanese players, you'll see that it was incredibly close. And I think really what this tournament should be telling everybody, this game is incredibly competitive, and the nature of the game really elevates that element of it too, where the game is very explosive, the game is very volatile, and then you also have so many good players playing the game, right? So many players that, you know, until this tournament I hadn't really hear of that much of, at least. But now we get an idea of just how many good players there are. I think looking forward, something that I think is really interesting to keep your eye on is that there's a higher likelihood that we see, you know, some of the international players show up to things like Combo Breaker and EVO and CEO and whatnot. Because traveling is a little bit more practical these days compared to how it was last year. So I'm super excited for the competition that we're going to be seeing, hopefully, at stuff like Combo Breaker and EVO, like I said. Yeah, it's very unfortunate to see the kind of conditions of this tournament, seeing that the players had so many different issues. I know that apparently pools were ran on one setup. There's only one setup per pool to actually play all the matches on. One TO had to handle 2 pools at one time, which is obviously putting more work on just one TO. It's going to cause more issues. A bunch of people were getting DQ'd when they shouldn't have been. Some people had to wait over 2 hours to play a match at certain points in the tournament. The tournament itself was not seeded almost at all. If you look through the top 96 or earlier on in the bracket, you will see that players just weren't seeded. Players like Peppery Splash, who's one of the best players in North America, was not seeded whatsoever. Almost basically any player wasn't seeded, to be honest. There's only a couple players I recognize that were actually seeded. Most of the bracket was just unseeded, which is very, you know, that's how it is over in Japan. This is what they do. And it was very frustrating to see because you have players coming in from all over the world to go to a tournament that was just ran this poorly. So the level of endurance needed for this type of tournament was obviously impressive, but also kind of unfortunate that it was needed in the first place. So yeah, for me, the thing about this tournament is that I feel like this is our first example of what the international competition looks like in this game, ultimately. And for me, it paints an interesting picture for future tournaments for this year and potentially next year, for as long as Guilty Gear Strive is around. We haven't really had international competition in this game. We got a little bit of a glimpse of it for ARC World Tour Finals, and now EVO Japan, I think, was another big glimpse at it. And hopefully now it's going to be something that is just consistent within the storyline of the game, which will be very, very fun to watch. Really, the big takeaway I want everybody to kind of look at for this tournament is actually go watch the matches, right? Like, look at how all of the different regions actually play the game and look at how close actually all the regions even are in the first place. And I think that we're in a situation where Guilty Gear Strive is looking more interesting by the day, just by how different the game might end up being because of international competition being more prominent now. How balanced do I think the game is? I think that's a great question, and I think it's a question for probably another video, because I think there is a lot to talk about in that regard. I honestly kind of want to do another tier list, not for the sake of doing a tier list, but I think it's just a good way to like talk about character strength. But I think there's more to the discussion too, because like you know, going back to the conversation of talking about how like a lot of, you know, the American players who went maybe underperformed or whatever. Reminder that Mochi lost at like before top 24. Mochi, the person that has won tournaments in Japan, has, you know, he won the ARC World Tour Finals. He definitely massively underperformed, but I think it just more so shows that the game is very competitive and very volatile. It's just how it is, right? So I think the conversation of like game balance and all of that is way more nuanced than like a lot of people are making it out to be. And I want to do a video where we just talk about that, because I think now is maybe a good time to do that since we've seen all this competition recently. Anyways, that's just my thoughts. Obviously, I'm curious to know what all of you watching on YouTube, what do you think about all of this? What do you think about EVO Japan? What do you think about the matches that we saw and the players that we saw? I know for some people, there was probably a lot of players that they did not know about and they saw for the first time this weekend. So I'm kind of curious what you guys thought about all of that. And in general, you know, just let me know what you're looking forward to for Guilty Gear Strive, because we still have tons of tournaments on the horizon. Combo Breaker is honestly not that far away.